Beware the secret partnership between big business and government. Often in the real world you will find a politician attempting to enact new legislation that is designed to protect or enhance the common man in some way. Soon after the media begins covering the proposed legislation, the largest companies in the affected industry are often seen showing their support for the changes of the law. At first glance, these changes will have a negative impact on these companies, as more money will have to be spent to meet the requirements of the legislation. The legislation might be for an increase in the minimum wage law or increased licensure requirements in order to weed out bad apples in the industry. These changes will undoubtedly affect a large corporation's bottom line, and therefore the corporation's support for such changes appears counterintuitive. However, it is positive support from the industry's largest companies that is often seen. The reason for the support is the ability for larger companies to swallow the extra costs while knowing that smaller companies will have a more difficult time surviving with the added costs. On top of that, the arrival of new competition in the future is slowly eliminated through years of increased legislation that adds layers of hoops that new firms need to jump through just for the ability to offer a product or service. The added law, rules, and regulations increases the cost of entry for new companies to enter the market, which is exactly what the current companies want. Added layers of rules and restrictions helps the largest companies fend off competition and gain market share. The elimination of competition in both the near and long-term future has negative consequences for the very customers the new added layer of rules and restrictions are supposedly designed to help. An example is the financial industry and the barrage of regulations that the SEC and FINRA has thrown at investment firms. Every time a financial problem occurs, like the financial crisis and corresponding housing bubble popping in 2008, or a large scam such as the Bernie Madoff Ponzi scam, politicians sense an opportunity to position themselves to step in and save the day under the narrative of protecting the consumer. After the 2008 financial crisis occurred, resulting in millions of people losing their home as well as substantial losses in retirement and savings funds through the stock market crashing, the Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act was pushed through and approved by Congress in 2010. The act was advertised as being for the benefit of the consumer, stating this much in the name Consumer Protection Act, making it difficult for a congressperson to push back against the legislation. Any such person who was not for the act could be ridiculed on the spot. Senator Joe Schmo is against protecting the consumer and therefore must be for big business. We must vote him out of office at the next election, proclaims the advisory to any elected official who might question the end goals of the act that will undoubtedly increase the size of government. On the surface, this new legislation appeared to set out what its name stated and add further protection for the consumer. Further protection is a key statement, as it should be understood that often when government reacts to an adverse effect and attempts to fix it, prior government legislation already existed to prevent the negative outcome that has occurred. In other words, government was already set up to prevent a negative outcome from occurring, but they failed to prevent it from occurring, and thus further or more protection is now needed. Naturally, government's proposed solution is to double down and add more legislation. This new act, along with countless other laws and regulations that preceded it, are all designed, in theory, to help prevent financial catastrophes and protect the consumer. In reality, consumers are constantly made victims despite ever-expanding government agencies in existence whose primary reason for existence are to prevent such negative outcomes. With increased regulations and licensure requirements in place, it becomes harder for new financial service companies to come into existence, as the required capital needed just to hire lawyers and an in-house regulatory team makes their break-even point to start earning profits too high. Usually, a new financial service company would seek out new customers who are first starting to acquire an excess of wealth that can be invested. As these new companies that otherwise would have formed in a free market are struck down due to added barrier of entry costs, consumers who are needing financial advisory for the first time are victimized by having access to less companies that can provide them the services that they are looking for. They are herd like financial cattle to the big financial service companies that are already established and have political connections, who have made it more difficult for new competitors to form. Instead of receiving a very personalized experience from a new company looking to build a 50-year customer relationship through trust, the customer finds themselves being given cookie-cutter brochure advice on their financial future at fees that are far higher than what a more competitive market would have allowed. The added regulations have resulted in higher prices and a lower quality of service. That is the outcome for those with enough saved money that a financial advisory firm will actually want to serve. Smaller customers with only a few thousand to invest will be the forgotten demographic, though ironically, they serve as the mascots for the politicians who push through the new regulations. With mountains of paperwork and stipulations to review and follow, the liability for each new customer rises, pushing the entry point to service a customer with little money to an amount much higher than the customer has obtained. In an otherwise free market world, a relatively young financial advisor working at a large firm decides to become an entrepreneur and start his own small firm. At his current job he has been giving advice to high-income cosmopolitan doctors and lawyers and is making a nice living for himself. However, his potential is limited at the large firm. At a recent Thanksgiving dinner, the young man felt enriched by giving sound financial advice to some visiting relatives who own a small farm out in the country. Between the good feeling obtained by guiding his small-town relatives with their investments and his ambitious goals of starting a new firm that can grow into something larger than his current position, the young man wishes to launch a new firm that initially will focus on the bottom half of income earners in the country. He has done some demographic research and for reasons he has yet to discover, the bottom half of income earners are well underserved in the area of financial advice. He sets out to develop a business plan around helping this underserved demographic. Not long into his research he discovers the reason that firms are staying away from the lower income demographic. Years of added laws and regulations on top of compliance nuances have made the extra work and costs associated around servicing a low-income customer not worth the hassle. This is not even considering the liability of a potential lawsuit that could arise with servicing an abundance of customers that exists in the nature of operating a business. Over time politicians, through the single weapon of law writing, have perhaps unknowingly disincentivized financial advisory firms from servicing those who need financial advisory the most.